If you've ever been underestimated, betrayed, or counted out by those who should have supported you most, then hit that like button, subscribe, and get ready for one of the most satisfying stories of divine justice you'll ever hear. Because what I'm about to share isn't just about revenge, it's about how the universe itself conspires to lift up those who have been pushed down, and how sometimes the greatest betrayals are actually divine preparation for your greatest triumph. There are moments when life pauses and heaven itself seems to whisper, "Begin again." For me, that moment arrived on a cold December night. 3 days before Christmas, when my older brother Marcus stood before me in his expensive tailored suit, his face cold as the winter wind outside, and delivered the words that would shatter my world. "Michael," he said, his voice devoid of any brotherly warmth, "the board and I have decided that your services are no longer required at Sterling Enterprises. Effective immediately, you're terminated." I stood there in the corner office that had once belonged to our father, the city lights twinkling below like distant stars, completely stunned. My mind raced to make sense of his words. Terminated. After 12 years of working side by side, building our father's modest real estate business into a thriving enterprise, after all the sacrifices I'd made, delaying my own dreams, putting in 16-hour days, even canceling my honeymoon to close the deal that had saved us from bankruptcy during the recession? "What are you talking about?" I finally managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. "Is this some kind of joke?" Marcus's lips curled into a smirk that I would later come to recognize as pure contempt. "Does this look like a joke, little brother?" He gestured to our company lawyer, Eleanor, who stepped forward and slid a thick envelope across the mahogany desk between us. "That's your severance package. We've been more than generous considering your recent ... performance issues? Performance issues?" I reeled, trying to understand what he was referring to. I had just closed the biggest deal in company history 2 weeks ago, 50 million Australian dollars commercial property acquisition that had secured our position as the city's premier real estate firm. The board had toasted me at the celebration dinner. Marcus himself had clapped me on the back and called me the golden boy of Sterling Enterprises. "Marcus, I don't understand," I said, my confusion slowly giving way to a dawning horror. "The deal with the Henderson portfolio was saved by my intervention," he cut in smoothly. "After you nearly botched it with your amateur negotiation tactics, I had to step in at the last minute and salvage what I could. The board knows this. Everyone knows this." I stared at him, my mouth agape. That wasn't what had happened at all. I had negotiated every detail of that deal myself, working around the clock for 3 weeks straight. Marcus had been vacationing in St. Bart's during the critical final negotiations, only returning to sign the papers after everything had been settled. "You're lying," I said, my voice gaining strength as anger began to replace my shock. "You weren't even here for the negotiations. You were on a beach somewhere while I was drowning in paperwork and phone calls." Marcus laughed, a harsh, grating sound that echoed in the opulent office. "Is that what you really think? That you single-handedly saved this company?" He shook his head, his expression almost pitying. "You always were the dreamer in the family, Michael. Living in your fantasy world where you're the hero of every story, but in the real world and business, results are what matter, and your results have been ... lacking." I looked to Eleanor, our family's lawyer for over 20 years, someone who had watched me grow from a child into a man. Surely she would speak up, would defend me against these outrageous accusations. But she wouldn't meet my eyes, instead focusing on some papers in her briefcase, as if they held the secrets to the universe. That's when I realized this wasn't just Marcus's doing. This was a conspiracy. A carefully orchestrated plan to remove me from the company I had helped build with my blood, sweat, and tears. "Why?" I asked, my voice cracking with the weight of betrayal. "After everything I've done for this company, for our family, ... why would you do this to me?" Marcus stepped closer, his cologne filling the space between us, his eyes cold and calculating. "Because you're weak, Michael. Always have been. Father saw it too, though he was too kind to say it. You have the charm, the people skills, but you lack the ruthlessness necessary to lead in today's business world. You care too much about doing the right thing, about treating people fairly. Those are nice sentiments for a Hallmark card, but they don't build empires." He paused, letting his words sink in before delivering the final blow. "Besides, with father gone, there's no reason to keep up the pretense of sharing the company. It's mine now. I'm the one with the vision to take Sterling Enterprises to the next level. You just hold us back with your outdated ethics and sentimental attachments." The room spun around me as his words hit home. Our father had passed away 6 months earlier after a long battle with cancer. On his deathbed, he had made both of us promise to work together, to honor his legacy by running the company with integrity and fairness. Marcus had held my hand as we both cried, swearing that we would always be there for each other. "That family came before business. Father would be ashamed of you," I said, my voice barely audible. Marcus's face hardened at the mention of our father. Father was a good man, but a poor businessman. His sentimentality nearly bankrupted us 3 times. "I'm not going to make the same mistakes. And I'm certainly not going to let your bleeding heart drag this company down." He gestured toward the door. "Security will escort you out. You have 10 minutes to gather your personal belongings from your office. Your access codes have been disabled, your company phone and laptop have been remotely wiped. And Michael." He paused at the door, turning back with one last parting shot. "Don't even think about contacting any of our clients. The non-compete clause in your employment contract is ironclad. Eleanor has made sure of that." As I stood there alone in the office that had once symbolized my dreams, my success, my future, I felt something inside me break. Not just my heart, but my spirit, my sense of self, my belief in the fundamental goodness of people. My own brother, the person who was supposed to protect me, to stand by me no matter what, had just destroyed me without a second thought. I gathered my meager belongings, a family photo from my desk, a worn leather journal filled with business ideas, a coffee mug our daughter had made for me in kindergarten, my hands trembling with rage and grief. As security escorted me through the halls of Sterling Enterprises, I kept my head down, unable to meet the eyes of employees I had worked alongside for years. Some looked away in shame. Others watched with morbid curiosity, but no one spoke up. No one protested the injustice of what was happening, the humiliation of being escorted out of my own company like a common criminal was nothing compared to the realization that I was completely alone. My wife Sarah had left me 2 years earlier, tired of my long hours and emotional distance. Our daughter Emily, now in college, had grown distant after the divorce. My friends were mostly business associates who now viewed me as damaged goods. And my brother, my only remaining family, had just thrown me away like yesterday's trash as I stepped out into the cold December night. With nothing but a cardboard box of personal belongings and the severance envelope clutched in my hand, I had no idea that this moment, this devastating, soul-crushing moment, was actually divine preparation for the greatest comeback of my life. What Marcus didn't know, what none of them knew, was that God had been preparing me for this exact moment my entire life. Every setback, every disappointment, every heartbreak had been shaping me, strengthening me, preparing me for the rebirth that was about to unfold. The doors that were closing in my face were not rejection, they were protection. The pain I was experiencing was not punishment, it was preparation. But in that moment, all I could feel was the crushing weight of failure, the burning sting of betrayal, and the terrifying uncertainty of a future without direction, without purpose, without hope. That night, I drove aimlessly through the city streets, the Christmas lights blurring through my tears. I had nowhere to go, no one to call. The home Sarah and I had shared had been sold in the divorce. My apartment was a corporate rental that I would have to vacate, and the thought of facing my empty hotel room was more than I could bear. Eventually, I found myself parked outside St. Mary's Church, the place where our parents had taken us as children, where I had been baptized, where Sarah and I had been married. Though I hadn't set foot inside a church in years, too busy with work, too cynical about religions, something drew me to the old wooden doors, to the promise of sanctuary within. The church was empty. Save for a few flickering candles and a priest lighting the Advent wreath, he looked up as I entered, his kind eyes questioning but not judgmental. "Rough night?" he asked, his voice gentle. I let out a bitter laugh. "You could say that. My brother just fired me from our family company 3 days before Christmas." The priest nodded slowly, as if this was the most normal thing in the world. "The Lord works in mysterious ways. Sometimes what looks like an ending is actually a beginning." "I don't feel like I'm beginning anything," I said, sinking into a pew. "I feel like my life is over." "Perhaps your old life is over," he agreed, sitting beside me. "But maybe that's not such a bad thing. Sometimes God has to break us completely before he can rebuild us into something stronger." I wanted to dismiss his words as religious platitudes, but something in his calm demeanor, in the sincerity of his gaze, made me listen. He continued. "The Christmas story itself is about new beginnings emerging from the darkest of circumstances. Mary and Joseph were far from home, in a strange city, with no place to stay. Yet that's where the miracle happened." I looked at the nativity scene displayed near the altar, the tiny baby in a manger, surrounded by animals and shepherds. I had always found the story somewhat sentimental, but now, sitting in the darkness of the church, broken and alone, I saw it differently. I saw the courage it took for Mary to say yes to God's plan, despite the uncertainty, the humiliation, the danger. I saw the faith it required for Joseph to stand by her, to trust in a divine purpose he couldn't fully comprehend. "God never wastes pain," the priest said, as if reading my thoughts. "Every setback, every disappointment, every heartbreak is either happening to you or for you. The question is whether you can see the divine purpose in your suffering." We sat in silence for a while, the only sounds the distant city traffic and the soft crackle of candles. I thought about my life, about the moments that had shaped me, our father's death, my divorce, the countless business deals that had fallen through, the friendships that had faded. Had all of it been preparation for this moment? Had God been using these experiences to shape me, to prepare me for something greater? "When you're at your lowest point," the priest said softly, "that's often when you're closest to God, because that's when you finally let go of your own plans. And open yourself to his." I left the church that night with a seed of hope planted in my barren heart. I still didn't know what the future held. Still didn't understand why this had happened to me. But for the first time since Marcus had fired me, I felt a glimmer of something beyond the pain and anger. A sense that perhaps, just perhaps, this devastating turn of events was not the end of my story, but the beginning of a new chapter I couldn't yet imagine. Back in my sterile hotel room, I finally opened the severance envelope Marcus had given me. Inside was a check for $250,000, generous on the surface, but insulting compared to what I had earned for the company over the years. There was also a letter from Eleanor, reminding me of the non-compete clause that prohibited me from working in real estate. For 2 years within a 50-mile radius, effectively blacklisting me from the industry I had dedicated my life to. As I read through the legal jargon, Marcus's words echoed in my mind. Eleanor has made sure of that. The realization that our family lawyer, someone who had been like an aunt to us growing up, had conspired with Marcus against me, was another knife in my already wounded heart. I fell asleep that night with tears drying on my cheeks, my mind racing with questions and fears. But in the quiet moments before sleep, I remembered the priest's words, "God never wastes pain," though I couldn't see it yet, couldn't feel it yet. I held on to those words like a lifeline in the storm of my despair. The next morning, Christmas Eve, I woke with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. The anger and betrayal still burned within me, but beneath it, something new was stirring, a determination to not let this defeat define me, to prove Marcus wrong, to build something new from the ashes of my old life. I spent the day in deep reflection, writing in my journal, mapping out the lessons I had learned from my experiences at Sterling Enterprises. I identified my strengths, my ability to connect with people, my talent for identifying undervalued properties, my knack for creative deal-making. I also acknowledged my weaknesses, my tendency to trust too easily, my reluctance to engage in corporate politics, my sentimental attachments that sometimes clouded my business judgment. As I wrote, I began to see patterns in my life. Moments where I had been protected from worse outcomes by what I had perceived as failures at the time. The business partnership that had fallen through years ago, which had seemed devastating at the time, prevented me from being associated with a partner who was later convicted of fraud. The promotion I had been passed over for, which had felt like a personal rejection, had led me to develop skills in a different area of the business that ultimately made me more valuable. It was as if I was seeing my life through a new lens, recognizing the divine order in what had previously seemed like random misfortunes. This realization didn't erase the pain of Marcus's betrayal, but it began to transform it, to give it meaning beyond mere victimhood. On Christmas Day, alone in my hotel room, I made a decision. I would not let Marcus's betrayal destroy me. I would not become bitter, would not seek revenge in the traditional sense. Instead, I would focus on building something new, something better, something that reflected not just my business acumen, but also the values our Father had instilled in us: integrity, fairness, compassion. I also made a commitment to myself. I would use the lessons of this painful experience to become not just successful, but significant. I would build a company that operated on different principles, that valued people over profits, that made a positive impact on the community. And somehow, someday, I would show Marcus that true success wasn't measured by bank accounts or corner offices, but by the lives you touch and the legacy you leave. With this renewed sense of purpose, I began to research new opportunities, new directions for my career. The non-compete clause had effectively blocked me from real estate in our area. But I had skills that were transferable, connections that extended beyond the industry, and a severance check that could serve as seed money for a new venture. As I explored possibilities, I kept coming back to an idea I had had years ago, something I had jotted down in my journal but never had the time or motivation to pursue. A business that would acquire struggling small businesses, not just real estate, but a diverse portfolio of local enterprises, and provide them with the capital, expertise, and support needed to thrive. It was a venture capital model, but with a community-focused approach that went beyond pure profit. The more I researched this idea, the more excited I became. I saw how I could use my experience in identifying undervalued assets, my talent for strategic planning, and my people skills to build something truly meaningful. I also saw how this approach aligned with the values I wanted to embody: supporting local entrepreneurs, preserving jobs, strengthening the community. By New Year's Day, I had a business plan drafted and a list of potential investors to approach. The plan was ambitious, perhaps even audacious given my circumstances. But for the first time in a long time, I felt energized by the challenge rather than intimidated by it. The next few months were a whirlwind of activity. I met with potential investors, refined my business plan, and began assembling a team of advisors who shared my vision. There were plenty of rejections and setbacks along the way, but I approached each obstacle with a new mindset, not as a sign of failure, but as an opportunity to learn, to adapt, to grow stronger. In March, 6 months after Marcus had fired me, I secured the funding I needed to launch my new venture, which I named Phoenix Ventures, a nod to the mythological bird that rises from ashes, and a symbol of my own rebirth. Our first acquisition was a small, family-owned bookstore that was struggling to compete with online retailers. Instead of gutting the business or converting it into something more profitable, we invested in modernizing their systems while preserving the charm and character that made the store special. We helped them develop an online presence, expand their community programming, and diversify their inventory. Within 6 months, the store was not only profitable, but thriving, becoming a beloved community hub. This approach became our model, identifying businesses with strong foundations, but struggling operations, then providing the resources and expertise needed to help them flourish while preserving what made them special. We acquired a family restaurant, a small manufacturing company, a tech startup, and several other local businesses, each time applying our unique blend of business acumen and community-focused values. As Phoenix Ventures grew, so did my reputation, not just as a successful businessman, but as someone who was making a positive impact in the community. I was invited to speak at business conferences, consulted by city officials on economic development initiatives, and featured in local media for our innovative approach to business investment. Meanwhile, I kept an eye on Sterling Enterprises from a distance. Through industry contacts and occasional news reports, I learned that the company was struggling under Marcus's leadership. The ruthless approach he had prided himself on was alienating clients and employees alike. The innovative projects I had initiated before my departure were floundering without my guidance. The company culture, once built on trust and collaboration, had become toxic and competitive. 2 years after I had been fired, just as my non-compete clause was expiring, Sterling Enterprises announced they were putting their commercial real estate division up for sale, division that represented nearly 60% of their business and the area I had specialized in. By this time, Phoenix Ventures had grown significantly. The diverse portfolio of successful businesses and a reputation for turning around struggling enterprises. We had the capital, the expertise, and the team to acquire and manage a commercial real estate division of this size. As I sat in my office, looking at the announcement of Sterling's sale, I felt a complex mix of emotions. There was satisfaction in seeing Marcus struggling, a sense of vindication in knowing that his ruthless approach had backfired. But there was also something else, a recognition that this was an opportunity not just for business success, but for something more meaningful. The acquisition of Sterling's commercial division would not just be a business transaction, it would be the completion of a circle, the culmination of a journey that had begun with betrayal and injustice. It would be an opportunity to restore the values our father had instilled in us, to create something that honored his legacy rather than distorting it. After careful consideration and consultation with my team, we decided to make an offer for Sterling's commercial division. It was a bold move, one that would bring me back into direct competition with Marcus. But I felt ready, prepared by the journey I had been on, strengthened by the challenges I had overcome, guided by a sense of purpose that transcended mere business success. The negotiation process was intense and emotionally charged. Marcus fought desperately to maintain control, even attempting to block our offer through legal challenges and appeals to the board. But in the end, our offer was too strong to refuse, and in June, 3 years after he had fired me, I signed the papers to acquire Sterling Enterprises' commercial real estate division. The closing meeting was held in the same conference room where Marcus had terminated my employment 3 years earlier. As I sat at the head of the table, reviewing the final documents, I felt the full weight of how far I had come from being escorted out of this building as a disgraced employee to returning as the new owner of its most valuable division. Marcus was present at the closing, though he had clearly aged significantly in the 3 years since I had last seen. His expensive suit seemed to hang loosely on his frame. His face was etched with stress and defeat, and the arrogance that had once defined him had been replaced by a weary resignation as we signed the final documents. Our eyes met across the table. For a moment, I saw something flicker in his expression, not quite regret, not quite apology, but perhaps a dawning recognition of the irony of our situations. After the documents were signed and the formalities concluded, I asked Marcus to stay behind as the others left the room. We stood alone in the conference room, the city lights twinkling outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, just as they had on that terrible night 3 years earlier. "I want you to know," I said, my voice calm and measured, "that I'm not doing this out of revenge. I'm not going to fire you or your team out of spite. In fact, I'd like to offer you and key members of your team the opportunity to stay on, to work with us as we transition this division." Marcus looked at me, his expression unreadable. "Why would you do that? After what I did to you?" "Because I believe in second chances," I said. "Because I believe that people can change, can grow, can learn from their mistakes. And because this division has talented people who deserve the opportunity to continue their work under new leadership." I paused, choosing my words carefully. "But I also want you to understand something. The values that will guide this division moving forward are not the values you've been operating under. We will conduct business with integrity, with compassion, with respect for our clients and employees. We will measure success not just by profits, but by the positive impact we have on our community and the lives we touch. Marcus nodded slowly, his eyes downcast. Father would be proud of you, he said quietly. You've become the man he always hoped you would be. I'm not the same person I was 3 years ago, I acknowledged. And neither are you, I imagine. Life has a way of teaching us lessons we never asked for but desperately needed. We stood in silence for a moment, the weight of our shared history hanging between us. What happens now? Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Now, I said, we begin again. But this time we do it differently. This time, we do it right. As I walked out of Sterling Enterprises that day, the sun setting behind the city skyline, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. The journey that had begun with betrayal and injustice had led me to this moment of redemption, not just for myself, but for Marcus as well, for the company our father had built, for the community we served. Looking back, I can see now how every step of that difficult journey was part of a divine plan, how every setback was preparation for this moment of rebirth. The pain of Marcus's betrayal had been the catalyst for my transformation, the darkness that made way for the light. There are moments when life pauses and heaven itself seems to whisper, "Begin again." For me, that moment came on a cold December night when my own brother threw me out of our family company with nothing but the clothes on my back. What I didn't know then was that God had been preparing me for this exact moment, using the pain of betrayal to shape me, strengthen me, prepare me for the rebirth that was about to unfold. The doors that closed in my face were not rejection. The pain I experienced was not punishment, it was preparation. And the revenge I ultimately achieved was not the petty kind Marcus had feared, but the divine kind that comes when we transform our suffering into purpose, our wounds into wisdom, our setbacks into stepping stones toward a greater destiny. This Christmas, as I look back on that journey, I'm reminded of the priest's words, God never wastes pain. Every setback, every disappointment, every heartbreak has been either happening to me or for me. And in my case, what had seemed like the end of my story was actually the beginning of a new chapter I couldn't yet imagine. The second chance I had prayed for had already been written in my name. The doors I thought were locked were about to open. And all heaven asked of me was one act of courage to believe that I was ready to begin again. This Christmas truly changes everything. The day we officially took over Sterling's commercial division, I called an all-hands meeting in the same auditorium where, 3 years earlier, I had been publicly humiliated and fired. As I walked to the podium, I could feel the tension in the room, the uncertainty, the fear, the curiosity of employees who had witnessed my dramatic departure and were now facing an uncertain future under new ownership. I began by acknowledging the elephant in the room. My history with the company, my relationship with Marcus, the circumstances of my departure. I spoke honestly about the pain and anger I had experienced, but also about the journey of transformation that had followed. 3 years ago, I said, I stood before you as a defeated man, stripped of my position, my dignity, my sense of purpose. Today, I stand before you not as a conqueror seeking revenge, but as a fellow traveler who has learned that our greatest setbacks can become our greatest blessings. If we have the courage to see them that way, then outline my vision for the division, not just in terms of business strategy, but in terms of values and culture. I spoke about creating an environment where integrity trumped profit, where collaboration replaced competition, where employees were valued as human beings rather than resources. I'm not here to prove that I was right and Marcus was wrong, I continued. I'm here to build something that honors our father's legacy, that serves our community, that provides meaningful work for each of you. I'm here to show that business can be both successful and ethical, profitable and principled. As I spoke, I watched the expressions in the audience shift from skepticism to curiosity, from fear to hope, from uncertainty to engagement. By the time I finished my presentation, the mood in the room had transformed completely. What followed was one of the most remarkable periods of growth and transformation in the company's history. Employee morale skyrocketed. Client relationships improved. Innovation flourished. Within 2 years, the division had not only recovered from its previous decline, but was outperforming its competitors by significant margins. But the true measure of our success wasn't just in the numbers, it was in the stories of transformation that emerged throughout the organization. The manager who had been on the verge of quitting but rediscovered his passion under the new leadership. The team that had been mired in internal politics but learned to collaborate effectively. The clients who had been considering leaving but renewed their contracts because of the renewed commitment to service and integrity. Perhaps most remarkably, Marcus himself underwent a transformation. After initially resisting the changes, he gradually embraced the new culture, becoming one of the most vocal advocates for our values-based approach. In time, he would acknowledge publicly that his ruthless pursuit of profit had been misguided. That the values I had brought to the company were not just ethical, but also good for business. The revenge I had achieved was not the petty kind Marcus had feared. I didn't fire him, didn't humiliate him, didn't seek to destroy him as he had tried to destroy me. Instead, I achieved something far more satisfying. I created an environment where even he could grow, where even he could become a better version of himself. Looking back on that journey, I'm reminded of the divine laws that guided my transformation, the law of preparation that uses setbacks to strengthen us, the law of surrender that teaches us to let go of what we cannot control, the law of faith that moves us to action even when we can't see the full path ahead, the law of discipline that provides structure for our dreams, the law of gratitude that opens us to abundance, and the law of reflection that transforms experience into wisdom. These universal principles are available to all of us. Regardless of our religious or spiritual beliefs, they operate whether we recognize them or not, shaping our experiences, guiding our growth, leading us toward our highest potential. The Christmas when my life fell apart was actually the beginning of my true awakening. The betrayal that had seemed like the end of my story was actually the catalyst for my greatest transformation. The revenge I ultimately achieved was not the petty kind that destroys others, but the divine kind that elevates everyone, including ourselves. Whatever challenges you're facing today, whatever betrayals you've experienced, whatever setbacks you've endured, know that they are not the end of your story. They are the soil from which your purpose will bloom. You have carried the weight of what could have been for far too long. Every silent night you've spent wondering if it's too late was preparing you. For this one truth, life has not given up on you. You are being shaped for your return. Do not mistake delay for denial. Sometimes the doors that closed were not rejection. They were protection. You were not being punished. You were being prepared. And this Christmas, the preparation ends. The rebirth begins. If this story has resonated with you, if you've ever experienced a setback that turned out to be a setup for something greater, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. Share your own stories of transformation, of finding purpose in pain, of turning setbacks into stepping stones. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and click the notification bell so you don't miss our upcoming videos, where we'll be exploring more stories of divine justice, transformation, and redemption. Remember, whatever you're going through today, know that this is not the end of your story. It's just the beginning of a new chapter, one that you have the power to write. One that can be more meaningful and fulfilling than anything you've experienced before. Until next time, keep the faith, stay strong. And remember that sometimes our greatest setbacks